Hello, everyone, and welcome to the People Strategy Forum. Today, we're going to dive deep into the essence of organizational culture with Peter Phelan, the founder of Values Culture. With over 2 decades shaping the people strategies at leading tech firms, Peter has become a beacon for those aiming to create not just a workplace, but a thriving culture where values speak louder than words. So at Values Culture, Peter has successfully guided companies towards achieving significant milestones through strategic values-based approaches. And also Peter is helping bring in some strategic leaders overall. So as we look at his bio here, Peter has placed more than 125 people talent leaders across the globe. So he's definitely setting that values culture from the top overall. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But his insights have helped shape businesses become magnets of top talent with culture at the center of the workplace. And it's focusing on making sure that people are looking at their most valuable asset, the people themselves. So join us as we explore Peter's strategies on how to reveal the true spirit of your culture and transforming the workplace to where we are looking at the heartbeat of the organization and transforming into a place that attracts the best people and retains your top performers. So welcome, Peter. How are you doing today?
I'm very good, Sam. Thank you. I am blushing at that wonderfully flattering description, and I'm also growing a beard and aging a few years. It's a whole series of reactions to the flattery and seeing my young photo.
I know we were talking about the how time slips from us earlier in the call here with the beauty of youth here, Peter, that you're sharing with the world today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Happy memories.
Well, first of all, Peter, tell us how did you get in the business of helping companies really change their culture for the better, identify their culture. Tell us a little bit about the history there.
Yeah, I'm going to go back pretty far, but fair warning, I'll move quickly through the years. But in my bachelor's and master's program back in Ireland, and that kind of motivation and organizational culture side of things was what fascinated me the most. I was taking lots of other classes in business and management, but that was definitely what really kind of lit up something in my brain. But then you go into work, and I was lucky enough to get a lottery green card. So work for me has been in the States. My first and every job has been here. And so, you do these smaller pieces of the puzzle. I did some total reward stuff, which is a very important piece of the puzzle. Specifically, benefits was my kind of niche within that. And then as I kind of worked in various different industries, tech, you mentioned was a recurring theme, but all other industries as well. I got to see just what was maybe motivating people effectively in good economies and bad economies, in tight employment markets and in soft employment markets. And it just kept striking me that you could get a lot of ROI from having a very healthy culture, one where the organization is keeping its promises, where there's just minimal friction from, tolerating poor management practices or sending employees mixed messages. Just like keep it simple, kind of know thyself, and good things will happen. And that could be, things that are relevant for 2024 with this unusual market we have with the, maybe sky high stock market, but at the same time, employers trying to be very capital efficient. And so in other downturns, by having a good culture at our organization, we were able to be a talent magnet, even though we weren't able to, maybe even offer more money for capital efficiency reasons. But people would make a lateral move or even take a little pay cut to get away from a toxic culture and come to a place where they could flourish. So after 20 years of doing this as a W-2 person, a people leader in-house, I decided to make the leap and do it for more than one company at a time through this thing called Values Culture, starting in 2016. So that was a little bit of a long answer, but hopefully not. I haven't lost everybody.
No, I think that's definitely good. It's the one thing that I guess we had to remember through all this. I mean, you were talking about the ups and downs and changes in culture, building organizations, helping leaders. I mean, all of this we have to kind of keep a good sense of humor, right? And I know that one of the things that you're really good at is looking on the lighter side. Would you say that, Peter?
Yeah, I think that definitely helps. I mean, it's maybe a separate but not totally different discussion from, curating positive cultures. I think some of the cultures that I've been in, either as a consultant or as an employee back in the day, were ones where leaders didn't take themselves too seriously. And they had that kind of approachability factor where, they could take a good-natured ribbing. And that just helps a lot, because if you can't be honest with the leader, the feared leader, then communications already at a huge disadvantage. So the chances of having healthy feedback loops up, down, across the organization, and of a kind of a culture where employees can expect clarity and promise keeping, are already at a disadvantage if there's no fun, and fun signals being sent from the top. But I do enjoy a bit of HR comedy, and have taken a stage or two, or a couple of dozen stages in my time, trying to look at the lighter side of HR.
So. Oh, go ahead, Howard.
So when companies call you in, Peter, is it because they're struggling with their culture, or they need help defining their culture? What are they reaching out to you in terms of what are they looking for?
Yeah. Typically, when I get the call or the email or the referral from a mutual friend, it's more for good cultures that want to be great. And that's been the trend.
Mhm.
If a culture is really, really in trouble, um, they probably aren't culture oriented enough to want to call a culture doctor. They might think culture is hooey, and like, I'm not going to spend money or time talking to that guy. So typically it's a culture that's maybe been very strong, but might be struggling for a natural reason, like growing pains. Maybe they've hit on that number, 150 people, give or take, and they suddenly, don't know everybody personally anymore, and they've been all smiles and high retention and high business success up until that point. And now it seems like they're almost a victim of their success with scale, that kind of intimacy factor is being lost. And so a number of clients have had that situation, and they're like, well, we based our success and our wonderful chemistry on everyone knowing each other, and that's beginning to not scale very well. What other infrastructure can we put in place to help people know what's expected of them without the benefit of the CEO stopping by their cube every week? One way to do that can be to define what that secret sauce that's made you successful to date, what that is. Maybe they need to define their values for the first time. So that's been the case with a lot of like Series B or Series C tech companies. That's when I get the call, is that, oh my God, we're losing our mojo as we grow. Help us make it a bit more scalable with infrastructure that goes beyond, seeing people every day.
Well, let's dig in that a little bit. What really defines a company's culture? I mean, how do we define that?
Yeah, there's some great definitions out there. I'll be standing on the shoulders of giants with this, but in a nutshell, it's how we work together, how we collaborate, how we get things done. And so I worked with this one client in the ad tech space a few years ago. Very positive culture, amazing Glassdoor scores, and amazing, internal employee survey results, and great business success. But they hadn't ever really thought about their culture and what, how you would even put it into words, because, they were just having fun and being successful and didn't need to worry about it. So before they called me in, the CEO had said, maybe we can figure this out ourselves. What's our culture about? And so he had some executive team meetings. The HR leader asked around, did a survey, but they were getting a lot of, work hard, play hard type stuff, which was a bit vague and maybe not necessarily actionable. So what we needed was a set of detailed values that, were quite actionable and were a source of strength based on client feedback, based on employee surveys, and were, granular enough to where if there were key decisions that needed to be made and they needed something to kind of tie break, they could go to these values as their kind of Rosetta Stone and help them get to a yes or a no or an expand or don't expand right now, by using these as a decision rubric.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that we go through often. Companies go through identifying what their values are, what their culture are, what and those things, and it becomes an exercise, and then they forget it. They put it on the website, and they kind of forget it. But really having those guiding principles that they can come back to and remind themselves whenever they're doing a major initiative or before they're starting, it could be anything. We talked about some of the tough times, such as layoffs. Which goes, well, geez, maybe we should, take a glance at our values, our culture, to see what we really stand for, and put this in that context. So, you mentioned that in identifying the culture of an organization that you've used surveys. Is this your main method of really starting the process?
There's always some kind of survey involved, but because you want as many fingerprints on this as possible and a lot of data to really think to know coming out of it that you've been thorough, and maybe that's why, or maybe if people haven't done that, it's why the values doesn't really propagate throughout the organization, because the executive team might have an offsite and they're doing their trust falls and cocktails and they're like, oh yeah, these 5 words encapsulate us. But then it stays on PowerPoint in a drawer, if you will, because they don't really believe it. They maybe suspect that if they present that to the entire organization and try and make it part of internal communications, maybe all town hall meetings, the topics are organized that way, or pull it all on the website or put it into performance management tools, that it won't ring true because it was based on cocktails and trust falls and not a thorough process. But anyway, so that's the how not to do it. How to do it so it can be propagated throughout your employee lifecycle tools and internal communications with credibility would be, using as many data sources as are already available. So maybe you've got client feedback on what really stands out about why customers are comfortable, paying you for your goods or services. Board decks, investor decks, what unique differentiators have made you worth that investment. And those could also be, maybe you haven't got investors recently, but you just strategy decks in general. And then my process also involves personality assessments, where we do a DISC profile, for example, if there isn't like an already existing tool like predictive index or whatever in-house that people already like. So we'll just have a look and see which areas are likely to be, what promises are going to be easier to keep versus others for this executive team, for these founders, based on the way they're wired. And by the time you get to our age, gentlemen, or even in your late teens, 20s, whatever, you're pretty hardwired already in your kind of how you react to stress, how you can try and change yourself and learn and grow, and hopefully we do that. But a lot of it is pretty baked in. So you're putting these executives at a disadvantage if you're like, okay, be like this, and it's the opposite of what they are. So I guess to wrap this excellent question, which is so integral to this discussion, the way I think about it and the way the approach is, it's almost like a Venn diagram of overlapping, and where they overlap is probably where you can place your bets on what the bankable values are. So we look at one Venn diagram is that client feedback and like why you're loved, the kind of investor voice. And then the personality assessments. And then another important, very important piece is competency rankings. So this is kind of like a survey where we will pull in the executives, because they have an outsized impact on the culture and how they work every day and how they manage others. But also we'll recruit culture champions, people who are successful in the business at from various geographies, various departments, various levels. And in most of these projects, the culture champions in aggregate have a bigger impact on shaping the process than, in fact, the executive team does. And that's partially a function of them having maybe more time, because the executives are so busy, they don't have a ton of hours to give for the project. But they're also the ones in the trenches and really feeling that trickle down of good or bad, or a mixture, like most realities, that's coming from the executive team. So when they do, I like the Korn Ferry leadership architect tool, and with 38 competencies, we have all those culture champions and the execs one-on-one setting with me. So there's no politics, no, oh my God, I better say what the boss thinks are our strengths, or otherwise I would get as good as an equity grant. And they'll rank the competencies and like what's really commonplace here, what's mixed bag, and what's scarce. And so that's a survey of sorts. And so we get a lot of really good data from there as to which are the themes that maybe values could be based on, those competencies that keep on coming up as things you can count on, not just from the leaders, but from, the majority of the team most of the time. That could be and if the investor lens, the customer lens, and then maybe a full team survey, which wouldn't be as intense as the competency rankings. If they all agree with that, then you might be onto a winner.
Is there an optimal number of values, or it depends on the organization? Some organizations can go crazy and have a list of 50 values, and it's like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, there have been some doozies in the past. I know that Uber, the old Uber values, not the new ones, were not only weird, but also very numerous. So there's like, 12 or 13 of them. And many of them were less than enlightened. But in my experience and in the research I've read, they should be, few enough of them to where you can remember them. So, anything more than 5 is probably a challenge. I've seen a few 6s that were okay, 4 maybe even better. Less than 4, you're probably not communicating enough in terms of guiding behavior. But yeah, 4 or 5 really true, really solid data points to help guide decision making and really encapsulate your culture is probably the optimal number, 4 or 5.
Well, I like that what you mentioned about the multi-layered approach and that Venn diagram, so to speak, and looking at different facets of how people interpret the culture. I mean, often, it's true that when we look in the mirror and every morning we see what we'd like to see, what we want to see. And, but then we fail to ask feedback from others about, what they perceive, so I really like the fact that you're looking at multiple angles there to really define the overall culture. Now, have you found situations where, well, I imagine you definitely have, where some leaders have found that, oh, geez, I don't like to be looked in this light, the way that my employees see me, the way that my customers see me. What are some of the things that you found there?
Yeah, that's normally true. There's normally some surprises in these processes. I had one amazing client a number of years ago who continues to be amazing. Their business is, unstoppable even in the economic ups and downs. And the CEO was totally confident that they would have kind of communication and transparency as one of their contenders from that 38 competency process that I got, and it got, that was one of his top 5, and he's like, oh yeah, that's a shoe in. But when the couple of dozen culture champions and executives weighed in, out of the 38, that ranked 33rd. So there was very little support for his theory that that their communication transparency was a towering strength. But there was reason why he thought that. One stakeholder group, the clients, and he spent a lot of time with clients, felt that was really totally a towering strength because it was in the ad tech ecosystem, and they were kind of one of the white knights of transparency in what can be a smoke and mirrors industry, or at that time was a bit more so. And so, there was a reason why he thought that they were going to be getting tons of votes for that. However, the employee experience was very different, and they had rapid growth. They had lots of different geographic centers across North America and Europe and elsewhere, and a pretty empowering culture, such that people were running with new products and ways of engaging with clients in one geography, and people maybe in a similar department in a different geography had no clue. So the right hand really did not know what the left hand was doing. Their internal communication had problems, and they were feeling some pain through the growth internally from that the CEO wasn't necessarily feeling. But we had the data. So, he saw the results. He's like, okay, I get it. Transparency in the ad tech ecosystem, yes. A healthy communication infrastructure internally, not even close. So he was like, okay, we'll invest in that to potentially be a value in the coming years, and we'll work on it. We'll build infrastructure. We'll hire people who are really good at this, which is, a pretty common story. Where you look in the mirror, this new multi-Venn diagram mirror, and you see some stuff you don't like. But there's also hidden strengths, which can be fun as well. It's like, okay, you're not quite as good at that thing as you thought, but look at this. Number 3 is something which you hoped you could claim to be, but didn't dare. But the team thinks you're already there because it's even good enough to be a value. And so it's always a bit of a mixed bag. Something that is pretty common but has to be handled with care is the idea of aspirational values, where it's like super important to the business. You want to be good at it, but you're not quite there yet to where you can claim it unabashedly. And HubSpot kind of, they're famous for their culture deck. They kind of, speaking of standing on the shoulders of giants, theirs stood on the top of the shoulders of the even more famous Netflix deck from 15 years ago. And what HubSpot did was they put an asterisk beside the values where they knew they weren't quite there yet, and they couldn't claim victory, but they were investing in it, training, hiring for it, doing the work, and they got the credibility. They passed the credibility test by having that asterisk. Whereas if you just try and magically say, "Oh yeah, we're amazing at X," and nobody agrees, then all of a sudden, even the values which were true on your list begin to be questioned. If, say, for example, that CEO in my earlier story had said, "Oh yeah, communication," then it has to be on the list. And then it's like, oh my God, the whole process is going to suffer now because of that shoehorning. But he didn't even think they were close enough for the HubSpot asterisk. He didn't even try at that time, which I thought was the safer play because it was 33rd out of 38. Maybe if it was in top 10, you could do the asterisk.
Yeah, so I think that's a great strategy. I mean, because you're communicating what is important, what are we striving for, and being true to yourself and to your people and your customers, saying that everybody likes that vulnerability, right? That truth.
Yeah, we're not there yet, but it's important.
No, but nobody's perfect, and things change. Somebody moves the cheese, and all of a sudden we have to focus on different things, and so it's right and true that we should continue to change and aspire to new greatness as we go along. So I think that's great. But one thing I want to bring up that you mentioned is talking about how there's some differences in culture. If a multinational company or that in their different locations are going to have potentially, a culture be different in one location and than another. So, what degree of variance is good and healthy, and then where does it start to become an issue where there's different cultures?
Yeah, excellent question, and definitely true. As soon as you even have two departments in your little startup, there will already be subcultures within your broader culture. Self-awareness again is the key. So if you need to operate, and you probably do, slightly differently in an engineering function versus a sales function, because those people are wired quite differently, or in a Singapore office versus a Omaha office, then I think that the key is to kind of vive la différence, so to speak, while still staying true to your core values. So I've been in organizations where they're getting kind of big and complex, and we even had a nice amount of data from maybe doing the original process of defining the core values that everyone could get behind. And then we did a secondary analysis of maybe one geography versus another, or one department versus another, and there were these recurring themes of what came in. We'll say there were 4 core values, what was really looming large as number 5 or number 6 in engineering or in Germany, and you're like, oh wow, yeah, those things are super important for this this ecosystem that function or department or regional office is operating within. Maybe those things should be reflected in a leadership expectation. We're not calling it necessarily another core value, because those are company wide, but there was another theme which was inescapably important in that localized setting, and we captured it in a different way as that team's behavioral expectations, and that was definitely important to capture. The bigger you get, and you can get away from these inescapable priorities that aren't quite core values.
So I think if I heard what you're saying, it's really not that the core values are changing. There could be differences in how they're implemented and reinforced in different locations. Is that
Precisely, yeah. These are just a supplemental leadership expectation for that setting, because maybe you might be a big player in the US, but in say Japan, your business is all about partnerships versus just like having the muscle to make it on your own. So your ability to partner as part of an ecosystem where you aren't the top dog becomes super important, and that might be a leadership expectation. It might be on any manager's resume ideally resume, but on job descriptions as you post them in that setting. That's always a bullet, but that bullet might not exist in headquarters because it's not as germane.
So one of the things that U.S. companies get criticized a lot about is the fact that we're too U.S. centric, and we are expanding our culture, our values to other locations globally that may be in conflict to some of their local values. And so, how do you guide leaders through this important topic?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a problem and a challenge. You want that kind of unified set of behavior and expectations, because maybe the office in Europe of an American company, that team's engaging with headquarters a lot. So you've got your internal stakeholders who are expecting people to respond in a certain way, collaborate a certain way, kind of meet the collaboration expectations that are captured in the values, so the whole global ship can keep moving effectively. In terms of how they maybe engage with each other locally or engage with clients, there could be a little bit of wiggle room and, more vive la différence kind of encouraged there, where you're not saying, oh, you must do XYZ because that's what Houston wants. So I think it's about having that level of flexibility around the edges, to where you're just being smart about how people and cultures operate and how that's different in Stuttgart versus Dublin versus, Sydney.
So I know we talked about the Venn diagram earlier as far as looking at different ways to see how culture is interpreted by different groups. But who is really driving? If you need to change your culture, if you need to change the way things are, who is really driving that difference? Is it come from any particular group, such as leadership versus the employees as a whole?
I think so. Yeah, the chief people officer, or chief HR officer, whatever the title may be, might be, more so the Jane Goodall of, or Jack Goodall of the situation versus the silverback. I don't know if even I'm getting my analogies right here, but yeah, the leadership will be setting the tone. You'll have your chief people officer, hopefully as the eagle-eyed, cultural anthropologist, making observations, providing actionable feedback to where things are, not going well, or wonderful praise for where, oh my God, CEO, that was a terrific town hall. You really embodied the values in this way and that, positive reinforcement as well as negative. But yeah, I think it's every leader's job, like every employee's job. I mean, even if you might not have a manager title, if you've got values that the entire company or has aligned around, hopefully you're thinking about that as you engage with your peers and others cross-functionally. But in terms of casting the biggest shadow on the organization, or spreading the greatest amount of bright light, it'll be leaders. And that's just, the CEO can make or break a set of cultural pillars. If the first thing they do as soon as they're published and propagated through the employee life cycle tools and whatnot is violate them or tolerate a jerk who's not abiding by them because they get good results in their jerky way, then you're in trouble. It has to cascade from the top and through every level.
So
Yes.
should there be some assessment of the values as part of performance evaluation, or do you not?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, my advice is when we're doing that kind of implementation roadmap. Another reason for getting lots of culture champions involved in creating a set of values is that they'll often help divide and conquer on the implementation. So the marketing person might be really good at getting the values into anywhere where people might be researching your company and your social media footprint, of course, your careers page. So I think that you want as many cooks in this kitchen who will then end up being the folks who are getting these themes to show up in all the right places. In terms of performance management, to your question, that's probably going to be an initiative that's led by HR, because we project manage that stuff. And the recommendation would always be that the behavior of employees would be in some way, shape, or form be judged upon their adherence to the values, and to what extent they're a culture champion, if you will. You probably don't want to judge people in a September performance review when you just rolled out the values in July. But after an appropriate amount of time and warning that this is an expectation, absolutely. And matter of fact, your values will probably never stick if you don't.
Yeah. Well, taking us back to the leadership piece that you were talking about, and Shar usually is one of our colleagues here that helps with these questions, but she was telling us a story not too long ago about, she's a serial entrepreneur. She starts all these companies and runs them and so forth. And one of her companies that she told a story about the fact that one of her leaders was not in alignment with the rest of the culture. It was actually destroying the culture of the organization in some ways. And so she had to deal with it. I imagine you've probably ran into a situation like this. How do you advise the leadership team to handle such a situation?
Apologies if there's some background noise here. Some of the classic Manhattan street noises are happening around us here.
The beauty of New York, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, so that is definitely a situation which requires addressing, and it's probably something where you're going to follow the standard kind of performance management or performance issue protocols, where this person would be made aware of their the impact of their behavior on the culture that they're trying to foster in the organization, and how their behavior is at odds with it. And some people are just oblivious, and they just need to be told, hey, this is what's happening, and you might not have realized this, but this is how people are being turned off by your behavior, and sort of the negative impact of it. And on some occasions that's enough. And then if that isn't working, then you will escalate and maybe have to introduce new steps, some kind of performance improvement plan, some strategy for supporting them through the change, through coaching, or and then if they are too hardwired, as some of us again in adulthood are, to maybe make that shift, it's possible that they could be better off in a more attuned culture. Like, there's lots of successful hardwired kind of hard driving cultures out there, where those kind of personalities, I'm making an assumption about how they were being disruptive, but just to kind of illustrate the point, would be successful, and that's where they should be, not in this organization maybe where their approach to leading people sticks out like a sore thumb in a bad way. The know thyself principle applies. Like, my son is studying at McGill. He's studying business. And we've kind of warned him that if he does go into investment banking, it's going to be kind of a bit of a slog for a few years as he pays his debts and kind of proves himself, with a lot of other kind of hard driving type A people around him. And he's kind of signed on for that. Early days, we'll see which part of banking he ends up gravitating towards. Maybe it'll be a less intense one as the years go by, but that's okay. As long as you know yourself, and you're not advertising, oh yes, come work at X investment bank, you'll have a wonderful work-life balance. No, you won't. Just tell the truth, and maybe this person who is so disruptive in the culture and that you're talking about just needs to be in a different culture where they'll be wildly successful because they fit in perfectly.
It's interesting. My wife is in the accounting field, and she's been telling me accounting firms are having a hell of a time right now in terms of both attracting and retaining people, and a lot of them are working very seriously in terms of changing the culture, allowing more work from home opportunities. So that they're really trying to make a major change in their culture and environment. Have you seen that done successfully?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's not easy to change a culture, and some of these changes you're talking about in terms of location flexibility, and they have their own logistical complexities, for sure. But if you aren't changing the expectations of how work gets done, with which internal partners, by which deadlines, then just changing the location, meaning that somebody could do this same stuff a couple of days a week from home, that's an easier change to make. I wouldn't even necessarily call that a cultural change per se, or a core cultural change. That's more logistical in nature. Not to make light of it, it's still not easy to pull off. But yeah, I think that's that's definitely been something that a lot of companies have been challenged with in the last few years, both running away from the office during COVID, and now running back or slowly walking back. Like Amazon just made their announcement to mixed reviews about corporate folks being in 5 days a week starting January 1. But yeah, there's still, that's a tough stand for a lot of people who maybe moved to the burbs or the exurbs under previous rule regimes. But at least they give them a few months' notice. That might be enough, not enough if you've moved your life across the country. But yeah, I think those kinds of changes, logistical in nature, can be made in months, not quarters or years. The core cultural changes probably take a little bit longer than that. They're more the kind of quarters and years. And one of my recommendations, not for ongoing business, but just because you might not need me to do it, but for my clients, where we do set the values in this very thoughtful Venn diagram, multifaceted way, is that they don't take it for granted that the world is going to stay the same, because the world, as COVID, etc., taught us, does not stay the same, but nor does an industry, nor does technology, AI, big disruptor there. But even just your team, even if you got higher retention, over the course of 18 months, say, people will get promoted, they'll have a bigger impact on their new spots, other people will move on, you'll get some great new, talent from the outside world, and each, hire or each departure is a micro shift in your culture. And if they're a C-suiter, it might be a lot more than micro. And so my recommendation is that every 18 months, you just revalidate, maybe in a less intense way than the first instance. Do your values still reflect your secret sauce of success as a business? Because assuming that they are evergreen in such a dynamic, internal and external reality, would be probably a bit naive. Hopefully, they don't change too much. You tweak the phrasing of one of the values, but the value itself doesn't change. That's often what I've seen happen. Little updates, but chances that something is shifting is pretty much guaranteed.
So we started off the show by letting everybody aware that you've helped hire 125 or more than 125 leaders across the globe. Now, would you agree that this type of approach of introducing new leadership to an organization is probably a rapid way to change organizational culture?
I think so. I guess if you include my in-house days, it would be thousands of hires. And yeah, a great, well-chosen, C-suite hire can be transformative in terms of just like really reinforcing the culture you want to set. Yeah, it's one of the quickest ways to do it. You've got a whole set of teams under their leadership who are getting this new positive direction, and that can be pretty transformative. In terms of the culture doctor work, I do this kind of analysis and culture studies. That's one thing, but the key senior hire is almost like the culture surgery, and that can be a good thing. Not necessarily removing a cancer, but I won't come up with a good analogy, but maybe adding a great prosthetic for a missing limb or something. But yeah, that can be a really transformative moment. In my culture doctor days, the last 8 years or so, alongside the culture projects I've been talking about, the placements I've done have been, I think, very influential, but they are fairly narrow in scope. They're all people and talent folks, so all under the traditional banner of HR. And I like to think that they've, in that kind of limited way, where you don't have as much impact from that seat as you would from a CEO seat, you could still be an amazing Jane or Jack Goodall, and have this transformative impact of bringing in great culture aligned people through your talent acquisition efforts, through your performance management system, which the great HR leader, like the folks I place, would enhance and refine, where it's kind of encouraging the right behaviors, encouraging business success through positive culture. Yeah, I think that could be a key hire, a people leader hire, can have an amazing accelerator effect on just great culture and HR practices in general. But we're talking about culture today, so yes, absolutely.
Well, thanks for Peter for that. Yeah. So as we come to the top of our time here, what are the main things that you want our listeners to walk away with from this conversation?
Yeah, I'd say definitely, know thyself is key. One of the ways where, I've tried not to take myself too seriously is, when I was doing my stand-up comedy that you mentioned earlier, or at least did we talk about that? Anyway, we touched on it. When I was originally new to the States, I would make jokes about, my coming from Ireland and kind of the complicated adjustment process to life in America. So similarly, I would say, maybe using humor, be humble as leaders about, not having all the insights, that you might think you have when in terms of setting a culture. So, definitely look at it from a multi-lens perspective, whether or not you're using a facilitator like me to gather the data, whatever, but, just like really try and get client perspectives, every department involved. You might be pleasantly surprised by some hidden strengths. As a leader, you might be sad that people don't think you're as great at this one thing you thought you're awesome at when the data comes in. So yeah, stay humble and keep on monitoring. So once you've done this big culture project and maybe occasional 18 months check-ins to see if your macro culture is still what you thought it was. 18 months is a long time. You should be talking about culture and the health of your organization on a much more frequent basis than that. Just from your regular employee surveys, they'll give you early warning signs of maybe behavior that's at odds with the culture you're trying to foster. So yeah, keep an open mind, keep gathering data. Would be key things for cultural success. And I think also having a sense of humor never hurts. Keeps you humble.
Well, many of our listeners out here that are thinking about, geez, where can I hear Peter? And I know that you are going to be speaking or on the Transform conference in what is it, March in Vegas? Is that right?
Yeah, St. Patrick's Day. Thank you for mentioning that. They were lucky. I've been lucky enough to go to that conference for a number of years, and including doing some HR stand-up comedy there a couple of years ago. So yeah, that's a very fun event, and they're expecting 4,000 attendees this year. So it's really growing like a weed, and just a really nice crowd too. Very kind of growth mindset, progressive people, a fair amount of tech, a fair amount of HR tech, but really all industries, and it's a great idea sharing place. And then if people are local to the tri-state area that I know Howard is, I'm also looking forward to a couple of speaking engagements in the next 5 weeks at Disrupt HR, the South Jersey chapter and the Westchester chapter, where I'll be doing HR comedy in that challenging Disrupt HR format with the 20 slides in 5 minutes. So wish me luck.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I know you'll do wonderful there for sure. Well, Peter, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today on the People Strategy Forum. It was great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed it as well.
Thank you.
All right. So for our listeners out there, we'll see you next week.